Welcome back to Gotham Trends. Today, we're going to dive deep into something kind of chilling, the rise of copycat attacks.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some theoretical thing, it's hitting close to home after what happened recently in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's a scary reminder that what seems like just, isolated incidents can actually become like a much bigger, more disturbing pattern.
Right. On New Year's Day this year, 2025, a vehicle ramming attack in the French Quarter took the lives of 15 people.
Awful.
The attacker was Shamsuddin Jabbar, a former U.S. Army veteran. And he used a rented Ford F-150 Lightning. It's sadly kind of echoes other attacks, like the 2016 Berlin Christmas market attack and then the 2017 one in New York City, the truck attack. And it feels like this horrible tactic is becoming more and more common.
Yeah, and what's really worrying is the potential for copycats. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, they've already issued warnings about this, about more attacks like the one in New Orleans. So this suggests that, they're seeing these patterns or maybe online chatter that's raising serious red flags.
So Jabbar's case really brings up this idea of lone wolf terrorism, right? Can you explain what that even means and why it's so hard for authorities to, prevent?
Yeah, so basically a lone wolf is someone who acts alone, like they're not directly tied to, some big terrorist group.
Yeah.
They might get their ideas from extremist stuff, but they plan and do everything on their own.
Right.
And that makes them super hard to catch because there's no, secret messages to intercept or any leaders to, try and stop.
So then how do people like Jabbar, who seem like they're not part of any group, become radicalized in the first place? Is it as simple as just finding the wrong website?
Well, the internet definitely plays a role, but Jabbar's case shows it's more complicated than that. Investigations found out that he was really deep into ISIS propaganda online, like participating in those extremist forums where, they talk about violence and encourage it. He wasn't just reading stuff. He was really part of these groups where his beliefs were getting stronger and more radical.
It's scary to think that someone could become radicalized, right in front of us, just in the vastness of the internet where it feels like anyone can be anonymous. Do we know specifically what kind of online stuff Jabbar was looking at? Were there, any warning signs we could have seen?
Yeah, the investigators found that he was constantly watching ISIS propaganda videos, the really bad ones, with violence and urging attacks on Western targets. And he was spending a ton of time in those online forums where they openly talk about violent extremism. So it wasn't just, accidentally seeing a website. It was like he was actively seeking out this radical content and going deeper and deeper into it.
So it's not just seeing it, it's the actively being a part of those communities that seems to be the dangerous part.
Exactly.
And this brings up a whole bunch of questions about, social media companies. Are they doing enough to find and get rid of extremist content?
That's a huge debate right now. There are organizations like the Anti-Defamation League and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They've actually shown a direct connection between this online radicalization and the increase in domestic terrorism.
Wow.
They're saying that social media companies need to do way more, have better ways to find and remove extremist content and work more with law enforcement to share information and actually take down the dangerous stuff.
So holding those big tech companies responsible is really important. But what about the government's role in all this? The FBI and DHS issuing warnings is a start, but what else can they do? To actually prevent future attacks by addressing the root causes of radicalization?
Well, that's where things get really complicated because you're talking about security versus people's freedom, increasing surveillance and monitoring online. That could help find threats. But it also brings up serious concerns about privacy and freedom of speech. It's a tough balance, and there are no easy answers.
So what's the solution? Do we give up our freedom for safety? Or do we just cross our fingers and hope for the best while knowing people are becoming radicalized online?
A lot of experts are saying we need a multi-pronged approach. So combining stronger online regulation, community engagement, and also public awareness campaigns.
Can you explain those approaches a little more? What would that actually look like? What are some specific examples?
Okay, so first, with online regulations, social media companies have to be way more proactive in finding and removing extremist content. That means improving their algorithms so they can actually detect this radical material, and then working better with law enforcement to share information and take down harmful stuff.
That sounds like a huge task. How can we be sure these companies will actually do it, hold them accountable?
It's a tough challenge, but there are some things we can do. Like governments can create rules that make social media companies meet certain standards for how they control content. They could also do things like fines or penalties if they don't follow those rules.
Oh,
And then there's public pressure too. People can demand that these companies take more responsibility for what's on their platforms. And investors can choose to support companies that are actually, trying to fight online extremism.
makes sense. It sounds like this isn't just about technology, though. It's also about people.
Yeah.
You mentioned community engagement before. What role can communities play in all of this?
Yeah, community engagement is all about giving local communities the power to identify people who might be at risk of becoming radicalized, and then offering support through community programs.
Okay.
These programs can do lots of things like provide counseling, mentorship, job training, things like that. They can also help people connect with good role models and feel like they belong somewhere.
So early intervention and support within communities could be really impactful. It's like creating a safety net to, catch people before they fall too far into extremism.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that community engagement isn't just about preventing radicalization. It's also about supporting those who have already been radicalized and are trying to leave extremist groups.
This is all really insightful, but there's one piece I'm still not quite getting. You talked about public awareness campaigns as part of the solution, but how can public awareness really make a difference in something as complicated as online radicalization?
Well, public awareness campaigns are all about teaching people the signs of radicalization and why it's important to report suspicious behavior. They can help create a culture where everyone is watching out for each other and feels comfortable speaking up if they see something that worries them.
So it's about giving individuals the tools to recognize warning signs and take action.
Exactly. These campaigns can show people how dangerous online extremism is, give resources to those who are worried about their loved ones, and encourage people to report anything suspicious to law enforcement.
So we've talked about stronger online regulation, community engagement, and public awareness campaigns as parts of this multi-pronged approach to stop online radicalization and prevent copycat attacks. It sounds like a massive undertaking. What are some of the challenges in actually making these solutions happen?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is finding that balance between security and civil liberties. In our efforts to prevent terrorism, we can't forget about protecting individual rights.
That's a good point. So how do we make sure these measures are implemented in a way that respects individual freedoms?
It's all about transparency, oversight, and accountability. Any measures that are put in place should be open to public scrutiny and debate, and there should be clear safeguards to prevent abuse.
That makes sense. It's a delicate balance, and it's one we definitely can't afford to get wrong.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act, and it takes constant, discussion and reevaluation. We need to be careful about protecting both our safety and our freedoms.
Right. And speaking of being careful, you were talking about those vehicle ramming attacks earlier and how they've become like a go-to tactic. Is there anything specific we can learn from the past, from those incidents, to better prepare for future threats?
It's interesting because while those attacks seem really simple to actually carry out, they often involve a good amount of planning and target selection. Like, for example, remember the 2016 attack at the Berlin Christmas market? The guy who did it, he specifically chose a spot with a lot of people walking around and limited access for cars, so he could cause the most damage.
So it's not just like a random act of violence. There's often like a really scary level of planning involved. Does this mean that every crowded place is a potential target? Like, how can we possibly protect everything?
Yeah, you can't guarantee 100% safety, unfortunately, but we can definitely do things to lower the risk. And it's not just about, having more security, like those physical barriers and more police. We also need to be smarter about how we design our public spaces.
What do you mean by that? Are you talking about like turning our cities into fortresses?
No, not at all. It's about finding that balance again between security and keeping those spaces open and vibrant. Think about urban planning and architecture. Could we include natural barriers or those bollards that are placed strategically? Things that limit where vehicles can go without making it feel like we're living in a fortress.
I see what you mean. It's about being proactive and thoughtful in how we design our cities so they can be both safe and welcoming.
Exactly. It's a complicated challenge, but it's something that urban planners and security experts are thinking about more and more. And it's not only about the physical design, it's also about creating a sense of community and vigilance.
So we've talked about online platforms, community involvement, the need for security, and even urban design. But what about the actual ideologies that drive people to extremism? How do we counter that? That seems like the root of the problem.
You're absolutely right. That's the key issue. It's a tough problem with no easy solutions. But one approach that seems promising is something called counter-radicalization initiatives.
I've heard that term before, but I'm not totally clear on what it means. Can you explain what these initiatives are and how they actually work?
Sure. So counter-radicalization initiatives are basically programs that are designed to challenge those extremist ideologies and offer different narratives. They often involve working with people who used to be extremists, religious leaders, and community members to create a counter message that exposes the flaws and dangers of radical thinking.
So it's like offering a different path, a way out of that extremism, kind of like a rehabilitation or deprogramming.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It's about showing people that there's a way that embraces peace, tolerance, and understanding, helping them to really look at their beliefs and find their way back to a more positive way of life.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Do these initiatives actually work? How do we know if they're making a difference?
It's a pretty new field, and the research is still being done, but there's more and more evidence that if these counter-radicalization programs are designed well and implemented properly, they can really make a difference. They can help people leave extremist groups, question their beliefs, and successfully become a part of society again.
That's good to hear. It gives some hope in what can feel like a pretty dark situation.
It does. But it takes commitment from governments, communities, and individuals. We can't just treat this like it's only a law enforcement problem. It's a societal problem that needs a solution with many different parts.
Right. It's clear there's no quick fix, no magic solution. It's a long-term effort that needs vigilance, collaboration, and a deep understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely. It's about dealing with the root causes, not just the symptoms.
We've covered so much today, from the specifics of that attack in New Orleans to the bigger trends of copycat attacks and this online radicalization. We talked about the challenges and potential solutions, but there's one question that keeps coming back to me. What can regular people do in all this? Besides that see something, say something campaign, what can we do every day to actually fight this threat?
That's a really important question, and I think it comes down to a few key things. First, be informed. Learn about the signs of radicalization, the ways that extremist groups operate, and what resources are available in your community. Knowledge is power, especially in this case. The more you understand the problem, the better prepared you'll be to spot those warning signs and step in early.
So being informed is the first step. What else can we do?
Build strong communities where everyone feels included. Extremism often grows in places where people feel isolated, pushed aside, or like they don't belong. By fostering a sense of belonging and creating spaces where different perspectives are welcomed and respected, we can make our communities more resistant to radicalization.
It sounds like building a sense of unity and working towards a common goal is really important. But what about those people who are already showing signs of radicalization? Is there anything we can do to help them and intervene?
That's where things get a little more delicate. It's important to approach those situations with sensitivity and understanding. Directly confronting someone can often backfire and make them go even deeper into extremism. Instead, try to have open and honest conversations with them, express your concerns, and encourage them to seek help from people they trust, like family members, religious leaders, or mental health professionals.
So it's about creating a supportive environment and encouraging dialogue, rather than judging or isolating them. Is there anything else we can do on a personal level to make a difference?
Don't be afraid to speak up. If you see something that worries you, online or in your community, report it to the authorities. It might feel like a small thing, but it could have a big impact.
That's a powerful message. We all have a responsibility to protect our communities and our freedoms.
We do. And it starts with understanding the threats, being vigilant, and taking action when we need to.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. It reminds us that we all need to be aware and proactive.
Definitely. We can't afford to just ignore this. It's a serious threat that needs our attention and our action.
This has been such an insightful conversation and honestly pretty sobering too. We've really gone deep into the scary reality of copycat attacks, the whole complex issue of online radicalization, and how urgently we need solutions.
It's been great to dig into these things with you. I really believe that understanding the threat is the first step to actually doing something about it.
I completely agree. Knowledge is power. And by shining a light on these dark parts of our society, we can empower ourselves and our communities to take action.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond fear and that feeling of being stuck and taking a proactive approach to preventing and intervening.
You know, before we finish up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about public awareness. What are some specific signs of radicalization that people should be on the lookout for? What should we be watching for in our families, communities, even online?
That's a great question. There isn't one specific profile of what a radicalized person looks like, but there are some common warning signs to keep in mind, like sudden changes in behavior, becoming more isolated, withdrawing from friends and family, or a fascination with extremist ideologies.
So, paying attention to changes in behavior in their social circles, that's key.
Exactly. Other signs could be a sudden change in appearance, like adopting extremist symbols or clothes, or expressing more and more intolerant or hateful views towards certain groups.
So it's about noticing those small shifts that might mean someone's getting pulled into a dangerous ideology.
Exactly. And it's also important to pay attention to what they're doing online. Are they spending way too much time on extremist websites or in those social media groups? Are they using coded language or sharing violent stuff?
It sounds like being aware of both online and offline behavior is really important.
It is. And if you notice any of these signs, don't wait. Reach out for help. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, family member, a community leader. There are also resources available online and through organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Anti-Defamation League.
It's good to remember we're not alone in this. There's help out there and support systems to help us deal with these difficult situations.
That's right. It's a team effort. We all need to work together to build safer and stronger communities.
Well said. This has been a really eye-opening conversation, and it's given me a lot to think about. I hope our listeners feel the same way.
It's been my pleasure to share these insights with you and your listeners.
Thanks for joining us on Gotham Trends for this deep dive into the alarming trend of Copycat attacks and the complex issue of online radicalization. We explored the motivations behind these attacks, how social media plays a role in spreading extremist ideas, and the urgent need for solutions that balance security with protecting our freedoms.
It's a conversation that needs to continue. And by working together, we can make a world where these kinds of attacks happen less and less.
We covered a lot today, but the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to keep learning about these issues, know the warning signs of radicalization, and be a part of building a safer and more inclusive world.
Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can make a real difference.
Thanks for listening to Gotham Trends. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the trends that are shaping our world.